Shocking.
Very
you won't be
shocking.
believed. No censorship here.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to this episode of Coffee, Kegs, and Kriegsspiel, the podcast of the International Kriegsspiel Society. Today, we are going to talk about Grand Jena, which we recently played. And we have Marshall here, who came up with the idea for the game. And we have the two site commanders, Miles from Little Wars TV and Nick from the IKS. Welcome, everybody.
Hello.
Oh, hello.
And to start us off, Marshall, tell us a little bit about the process. Why did you thought we should play this battle, and how did you go on to develop it?
So I like to aim high and push limits and do absolutely insane, crazy things. It is both an advantage and a disadvantage at the same time, I suppose. It pays off and sometimes it goes bust. In this case, I wanted to run the largest real-time live Kriegsspiel in history. And to do that, I had envisioned maybe as many as 100 players. So I wanted to do a really big battle. And I came up with the idea of doing Borodino. The problem with it, of course, is the limitations that we have on Tabletop Simulator. You can only have 10 umpires on a single tabletop, which means that each umpire would have to take care of like 10 players, which physically we can't do that. It's just not enough time in the day to make that work. So we had to figure out how to split the table, basically, like we did at what was it, Grand Waterloo, or was it Grand Leipzig? I think it was Waterloo.
Yeah.
Where we split the table up, and I think we had 3 tables going in that one, and that was like 60 players. And so I figured, well, we're going to have to split it up, and I found a battle that was basically 2 battles on the same day, Jena-Auerstedt, and decided let's do this one. And then I decided I would let the players kind of sort themselves out and decide who goes where, which would probably mean there'd be a big battle and a smaller battle, or there would be an imbalance depending on what the players chose, and that could create a really interesting dynamic, just like the historical battle where you have one side and then the other is outnumbered, and they're both hanging on for dear life, waiting for reinforcements or something to develop. So I thought that would be interesting. We did have another problem, however, which was getting the umpires that we needed. And because we just didn't quite have enough umpires to run both on the same day, we unfortunately had to split that off. So that we're running Auerstedt on, I think it was the 8th, and then the Jena on the 8th, and Auerstedt's going to be played on the 22nd, which is 2 weeks from now. So I had to kind of let go of the dream, which was a bridge too far, if you will, which I think is an important part of judgment and the tough decisions that you have to make when you're, producing events such as this. That's what I did, and it seems to be paying off, seems to have worked out. I'm not going to have my record. I'm not going to have that place in the sun, but at least I'm going to have 2 successful events.
Right. And then we also had, and I will share the screen for that and go a little bit closer to what's going on the map here. We had new pieces and a new map. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
I had Damon make these pieces. I had my own independent idea for the pieces, but it turned out that Damon had a very similar idea that he had been working on for some other members of the IKS. It was sort of a little quiet side project that he had already developed. So it turns out he had already done a lot of the homework. Now, I wanted things to be a little different from what he did. He accommodated me, and critically, he created these little flag pieces. And the little flag pieces, if you flip them over, they have values on the back side, which allow us to quickly calculate combat values and such when resolving the effect of the combat. So he programmed that in there according to my specifications. And of course, we can color the pieces. And as happened at Jena-Auerstedt, we have the French in blue, and then the Prussians in kind of a darker blue, like a navy blue color. And it provided for appropriate confusion on the battlefield. So that was part of the fun. The map was created by Sean, and the map was a whole completely created new. We found the maps that were historical and they were okay, they were acceptable, but the resolution was just a little too low, and the colors were kind of wild. And we decided, let's go ahead and make our own maps. And he created these maps basically from scratch. They are both handcrafted maps, with the 3D components, so that if you zoom in, you can actually see that there's elevation on the map, which helps us in making combat determinations. Determining is there going to be a modifier to sight or to ability to hit or whatever. And it's absolutely gorgeous. It worked beautifully. So those are a couple new innovations that we developed and showcased here at the event.
And do you know the pieces? Are they available now on the workshop for everybody, or?
Yes, they should be. Right now, we have only Prussian and French pieces, and technically Saxony. But I'm pretty sure they can be easily modified and edited. And I'm going to be going at Damon soon to request a custom set of Civil War pieces. I've even, because I want to take the rule set that I wrote for this event that you helped with, SoCal Advanced, and I want to turn it into an American Civil War rule set. I think that the simpler time period is the American Civil War. There was less variation in terms of the weapons and the cavalry in particular, and the artillery. Well, the artillery was actually probably more richly varied by the American Civil War, but we can still abstract it, rifled versus smoothbore or whatever. Um, and I think SoCal Advanced will really shine with fewer variables. One of the problems we ran into with this battle in particular and the rule set is that we've got, 6 different kinds of cavalry on the field and all of these other things going on. We've got different kinds of infantry. We have, Jaegers and Voltigeurs and so on versus line infantry. And all of that requires exceptions be made by the umpires, not to mention the nature of the tactics. Well, there's infantry square, there's assault columns, there's a battle line, there's a marching column. It's just a lot. And so the rule set that I developed for this game worked well enough, but it would work better if we had a simpler time period, such as the American Civil War. And then my dream is to write the rule set for miniatures. Yeah, look at that. I know Miles is pretty stoked, but I can't let Miles have a moment of joy without spoiling it. When units take losses, one of the bases will have to be removed from the table.
Destroyed?
Yeah, they'll be destroyed. Yeah, so as your unit takes losses, it shrinks, and your beautiful miniatures get removed from the table.
It's like a legacy game there.
Yeah.
All right.
What a monster you are.
I know.
All right. Well, then let's talk to Miles and Nick. And first of all, my first question would be, how did you first of all get in your position? I guess you were just sort of cashiered by Marshall. And then how did you go about to prepare your team?
I'll let Nick go first. He's more interesting than me.
Well, I disagree with that, but I was asked a few months ago, and we weren't really sure what it was going to look like at that point. But I had already had a bunch of players that I've played with before and knew that they were good. So I asked them to be the corps commanders, and we had quite an interest in division commanders, players that just signed up and had quite a lot of skilled players there, and so they signed up. I had the corps commanders. They had broad freedom to recruit or assign whatever division commanders they wanted. We had talked about distributing the units. The original Prussian order of battle had a lot of divisions directly under the two sort of CICs of Brunswick and Hohenlohe. and so they had to be distributed. A few corps were created, so there was a lot of talk between the corps commanders there, a lot of coordination as to how the makeup of those corps and their divisions even. We had a couple of cavalry divisions created, and that the corps commanders wanted. So I was glad to have good corps commanders that could that were knowledgeable about that kind of stuff and could get that kind of stuff across.
My story is very similar. Marshall very graciously asked me if I'd play Napoleon, and being an egomaniac, I of course said yes. And I'm relatively new to the IKS, so I'm still kind of learning the players. And I cobbled together, I think, a pretty good set of corps commanders. One decision that we did that was a little different, we decided to stick with the historical corps structure. So we didn't really change anything from the 8 corps that Napoleon had, because they're pretty evenly distributed. And I'm still learning the rules, and I kind of went with let's minimize moving parts, because I think that makes things a lot easier. I had some corps commanders with pretty strong personalities who weren't afraid to put ideas forward, which was great. And we had at least 4 planning sessions. They're essentially kind of group calls where we talk about what we're doing and kind of coalesce on that around a plan. And with any group function, when you have a plan, if you're the leader, the real trick is making the group think it's their plan, even if it might be yours, which means you just take their good ideas and take credit for it. And again, I was very fortunate for the team of corps commanders. I didn't really interact with any of the division commanders. Once we set the plan at the corps level, it was up to the corps commanders to inform their division, and that seemed to work really well. We did have, as you have with any of these events, a bit of fallout between people saying they can play and then realizing, oh crap, you mean it's that day? I can't do that day. And so there was some last minute histrionics, but I think we got everything in place. And I'll tell you, really hats off to Marshall and the crew for putting on a fantastic gaming experience. I had a blast. I was exhausted after the 8 hours of play. And I'm just sitting here in my chair looking at a screen. I don't know why I was exhausted, but I was.
Yeah, great. Okay, Marshall, let's talk a little bit about the starting situation here of the forces. Because as everybody who knows a little bit about the battle might immediately recognize, this is not how Jena was fought historically.
Right. So, I like to use the history just as a starting point, but I also like to do a thing called turning the map 90 degrees. One of the problems with doing the history is it solves a lot of problems for the players. They will typically just parrot the history. I know this because if you play any kind of game that puts you into a historical scenario with the historical information that you had, let's say you're playing a computer game or something, it's the Battle of Gettysburg. Once you look at everything that you've got, it's kind of tempting to make the same decisions that Meade or Lee made on those 3 days. And it's because the terrain and the other circumstances, they kind of lead you by the nose to go that direction. And it's very easy for players then to do what was historically done. However, in a Kriegsspiel, we're trying to create dilemmas. We're trying to get players to solve problems on their own and face new challenges rather than repeat the old ones. So if you turn the map 90 degrees and have everybody come in on different roads, now it's a whole new ball game. It's a completely different battle. So that's kind of what we did here. We have the French actually coming from the west and the Prussians coming from the northeast. And we had a campaign map. It also contributed that the campaign map was of Jena and Auerstedt in the east, and then it was this whole area that I had to play with from the west. I could have pulled a different map, but I didn't. I really liked the map that we had, so I'm like, you know what? We're just going to start the French way over here and the Prussians over here and let them decide how to split their forces and what to do. So that's what we did. So it's not at all historical, But it was really interesting in getting the players to make fresh decisions and face fresh dilemmas that were not faced historically.
Yeah, especially as I think everybody, I mean, again, who knows the battle would then know what the French did, and which historically completely sort of surprised the Prussians. Because let me quickly draw that in the map here. The French basically assembled here at Jena, whereas the Prussians historically were up here, and they had some sort of forward elements on these hills. And then the French just went ahead overnight and sneaked up this very steep slope here, basically like so. And I think it was it might have been a Saxon brigade or something, or a battalion, which was posted here on a position nobody believed to be attacked anyway. And then they saw some French and just like went away and said, "Oh well, there were some French, but that doesn't mean anything." So nobody cared about it. And then basically the French army sort of assembled in a very tight spot here, and because the map is 3D, you can't really see what I'm drawing, but and then attacked the Prussians there. So that's the historical context. But given the scenario as it was, Nick, for the Prussians, what was the main problem for you, and how did you sort of try to overcome that?
Well, sort of the the broad campaign goal was to inflict a defeat upon the French, either on this battlefield or on the other one, Auerstedt, and not just to simply hold. Okay, and so we had the majority of our army here, and so we decided that this would be the location for this stunning and glorious victory that we were going to achieve. The idea was that we thought the French were going to, let me see if I can draw, try to be moving this way through this mountain pass. And we would deploy up here, and there might be small French elements trying to move through here. But once the French realized that we had a corps down here and started to deploy, our main force up here, the 2 Corps, would start to move down and attack them, and the battle would be fought right around here. I realize that, and this has been stated many times, had we just deployed here with one portion of our army, and then here, we could have held forever, and then, you know, some forces here and here. But we didn't want to just hold. You know, we wanted to, we could have sat here and traded artillery fire at each other for days, but the goal was to stop Napoleon, not simply to stop and turn him back, not simply to just sit here and rely on the other battlefield for the victory. So turned out that wasn't what happened, obviously, but that was at least our intention.
Mm-hmm. And Miles, then what was your plan to not have Napoleon be stopped?
Well, when we were marching to the battlefields, we had actually intended that the northern battlefield would be the big battle, not this one. And I would shift a corps north to go there. But in the morning, or there was a 2-day kind of march there, we got pretty good intelligence. We had very good cavalry scouts, and we figured out that it was probably the bulk of the Prussian army at Jena. So we called an audible that upset a lot of my commanders, because we had planned a whole bunch of details for Stat Sultan. And we ended up sending, you know, the majority of our army, I'd say maybe 2/3, maybe a little less than that, you know, south here. And then we knew that the Prussians were spread up and down the entire battlefield. We didn't know where they were concentrated, but we knew they were along that whole line. And I really didn't like the terrain in the south. That does not look like a lot of fun to go through. It looks like a lot of fun to defend. And we decided to do a very inelegant giant mass and just swarm the top. You know, as we were making in our minds what the Prussians would do, in our minds, we were convinced they were going to be defending the high ground in the center with the, along the villages in that valley. I'm not going to use the names because I'm just going to butcher them and people will complain to you. But from Versen Heilingen to the northeast, we thought they'd be in that highland there. We were completely wrong. They were forward and we smashed into them pretty early. And I think we were very fortunate that we had weighted numbers on our side.
All right. Marshall, maybe give us a little bit of a quick recap how the fighting developed.
Sure. Let me see if I can pull up my tabletop here. Then I can draw on it. That I think you should be able to see just fine. And let me go here. And actually, is that working? There we go. Now people will be able to see. So yeah, the French were drawn up around here. One of the problems that we ran into was the French tried to deploy very far forward. In fact, they deployed in their deployment module, they deployed more forward than they were allowed. And the result of that was I was forced to kind of force the French back. And actually, that's not the correct line. It's like that. Let me erase it. And so that meant that the French were bottlenecked here because assuming if their camps are back here and they're coming forward early in the morning to take position on the line, they wanted a line that was up here, but they couldn't have it because the Prussians are already there. So they ended up bunching up between these woods and these villages here, and that created a problem for Miles, for Napoleon, for the French, which I was all too happy to create because I like creating problems for players to solve and just see how they solve them. That's what makes the game interesting to me. I want to pitch you a problem. And then the Prussians also had a good concentration. I think it was at least a corps down here. And Nick, you can correct me. I don't remember what was down there. Was it just the one corps, or were there two? It was just one?
That was one corps.
Yeah, and they were down here, and then the French had like a little unit down here playing what we would call marching simulators. These guys, and they were down here, kind of just standing there, looking, mean and present on the battlefield. The French plan, as I understand, or do we want Miles to talk about the actual plan?
Sure, let's quickly hear it. Yeah.
All right. So our plan was pretty simple. We had that brigade that you just circled. They were there just to keep an eye because we thought it was a pretty good chance the Prussians were going to try to flank us from out of the woods. Right. And they're an early warning system. And then right above them, the next group is 4th Corps. Which is 3 divisions, and they were going to go to that village straight ahead and become the pivot point. The whole point of the plan was 4th Corps would walk in, and then we'd pivot on them and sweep across the top. Next corps is 6th Corps, Days Corps, which is right on top of that little square woods. That's a small corps. It's only 2 divisions. They were going to go take that village in the center. I'm literally pointing at the map, and you can't see what I'm pointing at, so I'm an idiot. But right there, that's it. That was their objective. And then Bernadotte's I Corps was the next group. They were coming. They're going to go a little further north. And then we split Murat's command. We had 5 cavalry divisions from Murat. We put 3 of them, 2 dragoons and the light cavalry in the far north, and they were supposed to sweep around because we didn't think there were any Prussians in front of them. Why would the Prussians be there? And they're supposed to sweep around and flank. And then I had 2 heavy cuirassier divisions in reserve in the back, and then the guard. And the guard I split. We had the guard infantry in the center. The guard cavalry is actually to the south. They were there to support 4th Corps, and also there in case more Prussians came out from the south and tried to flank us. I needed some punch there just in case. And as Marshall said, we got into a bit of a traffic management simulator as we had some struggle getting troops forward, and we're never able really to deploy our artillery all that effectively. And then we got a lot of miscommunication from the cavalry fight in the north. From as LaSalle, who was the commander leading that, was starting to bump into Prussian formations. He was convinced in sending dispatches that there are 2 heavy cavalry divisions up there, and the front's collapsing. I think it only ended up being 1 brigade, but we still we had a lot of kind of tense moments as we're trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah. And then the Prussian plan, if Nick wants to talk about that. I mean, I can, but better to hear from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, I mean, so there wasn't really much of a plan beside. We didn't really know going into it where the French were going to be, or where they were going to attack. So, having any kind of a
You had a good defense in depth.
yeah, I mean that
And that was one of the things that I recognized right away. I just drew a bunch of lines on here to show that you had several successive lines in defense, which I think helped you.
I think one of my fears was that this would turn into a deep battle doctrine that would have been developed 100 years later. I think maybe looking back on it, if we had some of these closer to the first line, it might have been a little bit, a little bit better. But yeah, so that was one of the things that we talked about, was having reserve lines and fallback positions and whatnot. When it became apparent, and it was apparent very, very quickly, that there weren't any French in the south, we were going to have Rochelle move forward. I guess there were complications with that.
Yeah, I think the general plan was for him to kind of come up this way somehow.
Yeah.
Or maybe even a little wider. I don't know. But it didn't happen. He got some units that went forward, but they went forward. They were small detachments, not the full corps. And then the full corps eventually got on the road, but by that time the battle was decided. So they kind of sat the whole battle out. You fought the battle with 1 corps tied behind your back, figuratively speaking.
Right.
Whereas the French were successful in basically punching through. They were starting to drive in on these lines here, and they kind of were making a pretty strong push here, as I recall, and then there was some action down here. And it wasn't a simple French victory. It was a big grind that took place, which was a little shocking to me. And one of the critiques I had of the French strategy in particular was, rather than focus on one point and punch through at one point, which is what I expected them to do, they ended up kind of distributing their force along the front. Otherwise, just looking at this setup from my perspective as, the guy with the 10,000-foot view, I thought the French were going to punch through right around here, and it was just going to be over very quickly. And instead, the French seem to have diluted their forces, their power a little bit, and they still managed to win, but it was a lot more costly and a lot more slower than I expected it to be. So that was one surprise on my end. All right, I'm gonna.
I think I mismanaged my artillery because I never got a material battery formed, other than A in the south, and as we learn these new rules, artillery is pretty darn important.
Yeah,
and we're all learning the cavalry rules. We had 2 big cuirassier divisions come crashing in. One of them just bounced off. The other one did a little bit. And that's because, again, we didn't use them effectively. Had we had artillery to force infantry in square, the cavalry could have threatened them, but the artillery does the work. I think Soult did a great job because he tied up, probably more troops than he had in the south. And then eventually Bernadette just pushed a hole through. And then we had the guard and some other cavalry fall through. So I think we were in pretty good shape and we continued the battle. But we just didn't expect the Prussians to be where they were, and so we were kind of caught, with a rather congested line of advance, which is my fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, somebody mentioned in the comments that the space was limited, and yeah, space is definitely a factor, especially when you have basically armies on the field.
Mhm.
Yeah, space is going to be an issue, and it was created as an issue before the curtain even lifted on the battle. And I think you guys, meaning the French in this case, I think they navigated it very well. I really liked the Prussian deployments, though. I was really
Mhm.
impressed with how Prussia deployed their forces, and it's just too bad about that corps in the south. Had that corps in the south actually got engaged, it might have been a different outcome.
Yeah, and again, the way Prussia managed to sort of feed in their reserves one after another at the right point in time, basically when another breakthrough sort of was threatening, that allowed them to delay the French advance quite heavily, despite being outnumbered in several respects, like having that corps not being engaged, and then also having smaller battalions, of course, than the French
Mhm.
have. So the combat power of a Prussian brigade was much
Yes.
less than the French brigade was. But the French then they had the issue that there was sometimes a whole sort of cavalry division in front, and they couldn't really get moving and had no space, as Miles pointed out, to put their artillery into action and so forth. So
Yeah.
that was quite
The
interesting.
Prussians been polite and obliged us and deployed the way we expected them to. We would have done much better with artillery. I thought that was very rude of them.
You
Well,
could have asked. You could have asked nicely.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you
I'm
say
French, I
please?
can't.
You know, if you had said please, maybe. You know.
I want to ask Miles, whose idea was it to capture some of our guys and show them a fake map?
That was my idea.
Oh, okay.
I don't
we
even
went-
know if Miles knew that happened.
Oh yeah, we saw that.
He gave the order, but I don't think he expected me to actually follow through on it.
I didn't expect it to be. I was just trying. Anytime you create just an ounce of doubt in somebody's mind, it occupies mind space. And the one thing you don't have a lot in a game like this is a lot of mind space, because you got to make decisions really, really quickly. So I was looking for any way I could throw sand in the gear of the Prussian decision making.
I mean, it was so obvious. I thought to myself, are they in the South? Is he trying to double fake us?
Mission
It
accomplished.
immediately made me pull stuff away from the South.
Yeah, but considering command and control and communications, we've touched upon that. Was that much of an issue for you respectively? Did you have some sort of structure or support for yourself, like, I don't know, an aide or a staff officer or somebody who would try to keep the messages in shape and sort of paint
I
the
had
picture?
two young guys as my chiefs of staff who would help read the messages and keep things going. And one had to leave early, and that was communicated ahead of time. That was fine, but it was really helpful because, again, you got a couple minutes for a decision. You can't read everything. And I was moving my avatar between my three corps. I was just bouncing all over the place. The only place where we didn't have good comms was up north where LaSalle was, because they just never went up there. I almost committed all of the cuirassiers there as opposed to send them in the line, because I was afraid that was collapsing. But that was more due to delays and getting dispatches, which is appropriate. But I think, between the three corps that were attacking, we actually had really good comms. I think I'm going to get reported to the SPCA because we probably ran a couple horses to death as we were running around the battlefield.
Right. How was it for the Prussians then? I mean, thinking of that, especially because you personally, Nick, went down to talk to the corps that was just sitting there in front of Jena.
That's maybe my own command style, which is when I write a dispatch, I can't adequately portray that I'm yelling at someone, which is what I wanted to do. But I thought the comms were just fine, especially in the north. I was I was with Württemberg so much that I didn't really need to hear much from him, but from Prince of Orange, I felt like he was good, and I understand all their division commanders were good. So yeah, pretty good on the Prussian side.
All right. And then for all three of you, was there one particular moment in the battle which you thought was outstanding in some good or bad regard, something remarkable?
For me, it's about 3 hours into the battle, and it's just your brilliant timing as GMs. I was down with Soult, and we were just doing the turnover, and I said I'm going to move up north, and so they take you out of the channel and put you in a new one. And just before they take it out, the guy who Soult just got a screenshot, and he goes, "Prussians, lots of and I get shit through the other channel. It was just perfect timing.
Great.
Yeah, for me, I don't know if one particular moment. I could tell that the moment I got moved into the Rochelle command channel, the mood changed dramatically. From let's get moving to oh crap, we're about to get yelled at. I really enjoyed the fighting around Viersen-Heiligen,
Yep.
and felt that was very cinematic. I was present for much of that, so I thought that was pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, I think the player I had as Nate did a great job pushing into that town, and that was a hard fight.
Mm-hmm.
I'd still call it a draw right now. I think we both kind of held half that city by the time we called the game.
Yeah, I think when Murat, who was the French, main cavalry commander played by Achilles in this game, finally went forward, he spent so many turns waiting in reserve, very patient, which I think is good. And look, there he is. Achilles says, "Howdy, y'all." But he waited patiently in reserve, and on at least a couple of occasions during the live stream, we went to talk to him, and he's like, "I'm just waiting, just waiting." Which I think is something that's in rare supply in a Kriegsspiel game. One of the problems that we run into is players want to play. It's a Saturday. They've got 6 to 8 hours of time that's dedicated for them and for this game, and then that's all they get. So they want to get into the action, which is different from history, which is historically you probably don't want to get in the action if you know what you're doing. If the battle passes you by, oh well. And when you do get in the action, you want it to be quick and decisive and be over quickly. But Achilles waited patiently to send his unit forward. And then, of course, he went in. And we all know it's getting late. I'm looking at my clock and everything, and I'm like, man, I don't know how many turns we have left in this game. But he went forward just in time. His attack landed in a timely fashion with more or less the intended effect. And I think that was a cool moment. It was really cool to see somebody who was playing historically and realistically rather than saying, "Hey, this is my Saturday. I want to start, throwing lead. Let's get in there." So I appreciated that. That was a cool moment.
Well, as his commander, I greatly appreciate it. Again, I had really good corps commanders who were very patient with me.
Okay, and then finally, what would be one sort of major lesson you took away from the Kriegsspiel? That's because we always played for fun, but it's also a sort of a learning experience.
Is that to all of us?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I mean, especially to you, like for the whole event thing, but yeah.
I've got a list, but I'll condense it. But I'll let Miles and Nick go first, please.
All right, I'll go first, Nick, since I put you on the spot earlier. I think for me, it's really the importance of having a reserve and a significant reserve so that you can react to the unexpected. Because in your mind, as you're planning for the game, everything is laid out and they're going to do exactly what you think they're going to do. They're not. And if you don't have a reserve and you're not thoughtful how you commit it, it's not. It's not going to be a good outcome for the players. And everyone put a lot of effort getting ready for this game. And so I felt a lot of responsibility to try to do the best I can to have the best game for the French side. And we were fortunate. It seemed to work out for us. But it really reinforced to me, you can't believe your own BS. You have to have a reserve for the unexpected.
Yeah. Hey, Nick and Jan, what's a reserve? As a member of the IKS, I don't know what a reserve is.
Right,
Is that where all our money comes from?
yeah.
I mean, isn't that what you send in the moment you make contact with the enemy?
Yeah.
Commit the reserve.
Yeah, just really quick, an anecdote, because I happened to be attending a Kriegsspiel session here at the School for Military Police and Staff Service in Hanover of the German Armed Forces, and they were running, as they did last year, a historical Kriegsspiel scenario, 1866, with the Chischwitz rules, and it went much better than last time. But what I thought was so interesting to see, the players, they were all like very young officers. They didn't really have much leadership experience, also more than the guys last year. But they were really invested this time, which was really great to see. And they wanted to have like wargaming implemented all over, and wanted to play again, even though it was like a 2-day event for them, and they had to really get into it. But they tend to make like the basic same mistakes like every new player makes when playing Kriegsspiel, like putting your artillery at the end of your column, unable to support you, or send in like a whole division without artillery. Well, it's just got shot to pieces basically. And then also they had no reserves; they couldn't really react, and that made the basically a whole Prussian division melt away because it couldn't do anything against a concentrated Habsburg offensive there, which was very, very interesting to see. And then even allowed the Austrians to shift over a whole sort of regiment to the other side to even reinforce that advance. And then they also do like the classic blunder, the longest lines, right? All those sort of things which don't really have much to do with Franco-Prussian War and all that stuff. But yeah, there you have it. The pros do the same mistakes when they start learning the ropes. Nick, what about you?
Yeah, I don't think I made any mistakes. So, Marshall, no, I think so. I did learn certainly a lot of things about reserves. I could have done better, but I think my biggest takeaway was reading the terrain a little bit better. I could have, looking at the map, I kicked myself in some areas, and I think that I think deployment is everything, especially when you're defending. When you have the first, when you can deploy first. I think I could have certainly looked at that map better and closer and made better choices. So I think that maybe doing a second pass and a third pass before you plop units down is a good thing.
All right.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest lesson that I took away is that most people are simply not on my level. And,
We aspire, Marshall. We aspire.
Are we above your level?
No, I think it's important, I think, to aim high and to be ambitious in your vision. But once your vision makes contact with reality, you're gonna have to be prepared to jettison certain parts of your vision that are less important or less critical to the success of the overall event. And that was something that I did on more than one occasion. I did it with the battle itself. I did that with the size and scope of the battle in terms of how many pieces, because we were actually going to have 3 times as many pieces on the tabletop, because I wanted to, really drill down and be precise and everything to the order of battle. And physically, those limitations were just too much. They were impractical. Could we have done it technically? Yes. But from a practical consideration, with the players moving and umpires moving 3 times the number of units, we had to step down from that. And then running the 2 battles on the same day, that was a really lofty ideal. But when we didn't have the umpire support to match, and it's really, really hard to get umpire support, and it's really, really hard even to get the people who say they'll be there to actually show up or stick it out. So in the end, I made another tough call to split the event to 2 days. That kills me to have to do that, but at the same time, it ensured that both events would be successful. So at the end of the day, listen to my fellow umpires and the people who are giving their input and advice and saying, hey, we need to step back from this particular goal because it's just like I've said before, it's a bridge too far, referencing Operation Market Garden in the movie line. And yeah, in the end, I think it's okay to kind of have that vast, expansive vision, but then you trim it until you get to what you really can do, and then you make sure that what you really can do is executed very well. And in that way, you are simultaneously pushing your boundaries, but you're remaining within the limits of what's feasible. And I think that's kind of the way to maximize the value of the event for everyone. And that was kind of my lesson on that. So that was one of the big takeaways I took from this.
Awesome. Great. All right. Well then, thanks a lot, everybody, for being here, spending time and discussing the battle. That was very nice of you. And of course, thanks to all the viewers and those who discussed in the chat. Make sure to join the IKS, maybe our Patreon, which helps us pay for all the hosting stuff of the website and what have you. Make also sure to visit Little Wars TV in case you shouldn't know them, which I think would be very, very strange. But there you go. Again, thanks for everybody on the panel, and have a good Sunday. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.